Okay, today is February 28th, 2017, and this is a CFTA Virtual Roundtable webinar. I'd like to go ahead and welcome today's panelists. With us today is Jessica Valenti. She's the FIS Manager at the University of Massachusetts Lowell. Hey, Jessica.
Hello, Michelle.
Glad that you make it today. And Jessica is actually the reason that this whole virtual roundtable started. So we have her to thank for today, so thank you. And then with her is Pamela Locke, who's a GIS specialist at UMass Lowell as well. Hi, Pamela.
Hello.
Anna Bard, she works at the University of Kentucky as a program specialist for the Human Development Institute. Hello, Anna.
Hi, everybody.
Now, Anna and I work together on this project. I'm Michelle Ellington, the president of CFTA and also the GIS coordinator for the University of Kentucky Facilities Information Services. And so Anna and I and Brian Zimmerman, who unfortunately cannot be here, he was a fifth panelist on today's roundtable, and strep throat is running rapid around here. I actually just got over it yesterday. I almost had to cancel today. So I took the reins. He has the fever I had 2 days ago, and I'm going to do the best I can to fill in for him. But if anybody does have any technical questions they would like to follow up with after this webinar, you can feel free to reach out to either Brian or myself. So with that, I will go ahead and let you know that today's presentation is estimated to run 45 minutes, and we'll leave some time at the end for some Q&A open to attendees. But basically, this is going to be a very comfortable, not too structured roundtable discussion between UMass Lowell and the University of Kentucky. They were interested in learning from us on kind of what we did. They saw that we had some accessibility mapping functionality on our homepage map, and they said, hey, we got some questions. Can you help us out with knowing some of the answers? And so we put this roundtable together so that everyone can learn together as a public roundtable discussion. So we're going to go over the history of the accessibility mapping at the University of Kentucky. Anna Bard, she's going to take the reins and kind of talk to everyone about the survey effort and how the features were collected, and then I'll get into some of the technical questions and the answers that we put together for UMass Lowell. So panelists, I don't want to be the only one talking here, so as things get going, feel free to just chime in, and we just will do some ping-ponging back and forth. Okay, so I'm going to start with this map. Anna, does this look familiar to you?
Yeah, I haven't looked at it in a while, but yeah.
This is, I'm sure a lot of other universities out there have these little relic maps. This is the old accessibility map on the UK's campus. For any old GISers out there, this is ArcIMS. It still lives. So this is a fully functioning IMS website. This is probably circa, what, 2000? And it was pretty much a warm, fuzzy project that a department here at UK did on their own, the Kentucky Geological Survey, KGS. And it was done as an effort of goodwill by people in that department who were passionate that UK needed an accessibility map, and they needed to make the information communicated out to those who needed to know where such features existed on our campus. And as the years progressed, it's just like any map, information gets out of date very quickly, and they realized they were not the place to be maintaining this data. So over many, many years, I first got wind of this when I started UK back in 2006, and KGS came to me and said, hey, would facilities want to take this over? But like, I think a lot of the reasons why everybody here is listening to this webinar is, this project takes money, and oftentimes this is not a high priority, funded project on people's radar. So no one had money, no one really wanted to pay for it, so it just maintained a labor of love by KGS for many more years. And then here at UK, the President's Office started a sustainability grant and welcomed submissions all around the university for ways that departments thought they could improve the campus setting through innovative projects. And they were reviewed, and some received funding. And I was part of the application submission for two years, right, Anna? HDI, it was both, they were both submitted through HDI, correct?
Yeah, we had 2 rounds of that, correct.
2 rounds. First time, we didn't get it, and really thought we would. Second time, we were encouraged to apply the following year. Really thought we were going to get it that year. We didn't, and we didn't know what to do. So at that time, there were some really interrelationships grew between the Vice President and the President's Office and HDI, and some letters went back and forth. And my department, the Facilities Information Services Group, through Andrew Blues, our director and leader, he funded a $17,000 project. And the money was basically given to HDI, but not like, handed over. It was more so given in the sense that we hired staff for them to supervise the data collection effort of all accessibility features on campus. I say all loosely. I guess it's still a work in progress. But it was, 1 fiscal year funding. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Anna, and she can tell you more about HDI, her side of the story, because that's just my side of the story, and how she managed the survey and collection of the accessibility information. So Anna, take it away.
Hey, thanks, Michelle. Yeah, it leads into it nicely. Just to back up just a tad, the Human Development Institute is a university center for excellence in developmental disabilities. And if you don't have one on your campus, there is one in your state. So there are people like me doing work to make sure that people with disabilities are included and can fully participate in their communities. So just that's where I reside. I reside under research at the university. And so I had known about this project when I came on as UK staff, and had kind of heard that there were some efforts to update the information, present it in a new way, and as I'm passionate about building inclusive communities, I also have a background in GIS and a bachelor's in some grad work in using spatial data and geography. So it was kind of just the perfect match for me. And so we had to figure out how to do this. And previously, data was collected on, I think, 17 by 11 printed map segments. And so we needed to think of a way that this data would be sustained and be able to be updated and be flexible. So we brought that into the web environment. Facilities, Michelle's group provided us with reference data. There was a set of building entrances, some pretty good imagery, sidewalk center lines, building footprints. And so we were able to take that and bring it into ARC GIS Online and create some hosted feature layers to collect the data in and collect, collector for ArcGIS. So we brought it into that web environment, and then we got to hire students. So we hired 5 students, and the money was available for a year. I think we actually collected data for about 9 months. And so these students were from all different disciplines. I had 1 geography, but a couple engineering students, and they really brought a lot of energy into the project, and I was really excited to have them working with me. So sort of my lens for developing the data set that we would collect was that, we all have different abilities. So I wanted to move away from just collecting the information of this door is accessible or it's not accessible. And so what we moved into was actually collecting multiple measurements on each door, multiple measurements on each parking space, and I can go over those numbers here in just a moment and what we ended up collecting. So we broke campus, which every campus is different. We're lucky enough that our core campus is mostly in one space, one area, and so we broke that up into about 4 different sections, and we started with just locating features. So let's locate all the doors in our phase 1 in our pilot area. Let's locate every instance of a step in the pathway in that area, and on and on. So we ended up locating every curb cut, every space we came across where we thought there should be a curb cut and was not, and there was not. Each parking space, this is all point data so far, every instance of a step, so there are over 900 of those. I think it's over 5,000 actual steps in the exterior part of our campus routes. We looked at different hazards or barriers, and so that includes things like broken pavement or maybe a telephone pole being in the middle of a sidewalk so it makes it too narrow. We located building entrances, ramps, slopes that were over 5%, which is the ADA recommendation of a walk path. And after we did the initial location of the features, we went back and started to do some pretty specific measuring. And so using a number of tools, and like I said, collector for ArcGIS via our actual method was we used iPads. We started measuring entrances, and so there was about 10 measurements on each entrance. And parking, we had about 9 measurements per space, and so as you can see, this starts to add up into a lot of data. But from there, now we're able to process the data in a lot of different ways. And so instead of just using that binary term, this is accessible or this is not, to someone in a manual chair, one slope may be accessible to them. To someone in a power chair, they might be able to navigate a steeper slope. So we wanted to, and though we haven't reached all of this in our network at this point, we wanted to be able to have that baseline of this really good, very detailed data to be able to integrate as we move along and further move forward in the application development.
Hey Anna, this is Jessica. Can I ask you a question in there? So one of the things that I think about is having this sort of multidisciplinary team of students collecting the data is not a single one of them is an ADA code expert, right? So did you feel like you had to do a good amount of training as far as directing these students on exactly what constitutes a barrier for somebody that is perhaps in a wheelchair? Or were you just collecting raw data points and figured then the experts in accessibility would make the determinations later as far as what truly is accessible or not?
Yes, Jessica, that's a really awesome question. Yeah, I particularly picked these students based on their, these are folks that were really able to think critically, and they were a part of building this workflow with me. And though we created it, as you get out in the field, I think we all know that things change, and so they were pretty deep and into sort of decoding the ADA with me. Now, I do have some background in it, and I spent a lot of time being able, walking through the things to look for. So another approach that we took, and this might address your question sort of more directly, but is when they would go out, I would have one student would be working in phase 1, and they would go out into all of phase 1 and do all the measurements on, for example, parking. So before they started that phase, I would spend time with that one student. We would look at code, at the ADA codes. We would practice measuring and making sure we're doing it the same way, and kind of like troubleshoot a number of things that may come up, because there's a lot of gray area when you're sorting through the ADA. And so we tried to sort all that out and have specific training towards each feature before they went out and collected that that data, but they referenced it a lot, and so that critical thinking and being able to work through that so that we have consistent measurements was really crucial. Does that answer your question, Jessica?
Yeah, absolutely. I just speaking from starting this sort of process over here at UMass is, you know, our Title IX equal opportunity folks within HR, you know, would be very intimately tied to this kind of thing because I think they view it as, you know, liability and code and all of that. So I was just curious sort of how you sorted through that, but that answered my question, certainly.
Great. Yeah, it's definitely an adventure. There's not it takes someone just really getting in the mix and getting very comfortable with that. So yeah, no matter where that person comes from, just having you know, you really have to get directly into the ADA codes and parse through them to get a lot of different answers, because a lot of different things come up, and the students came to me with great answers, and some of them we figured out together, and some of them we're still a little unsure of, but did the best we could. But one thing I would also recommend is just to include people with disabilities. Oftentimes they will, they already know, they know what they need, they know the information they want. So first of all, you're making best use of your time and your resources because you're collecting the information that these folks actually need. But oftentimes they have insights that because this is just, you know, their typical way they approach the world, they will notice a lot of things and have a better grasp of things than some other folks do. And a lot of times they have little shortcuts and other tips and interesting things that you wouldn't otherwise recognize. So definitely look towards including those folks too as you can. And sort of one final thing I'll say, and I'm glad to have more questions, thank you for that, is that the actual data collection went very quickly. It was the planning, the data structure, and the training and hiring, and making sure that we're collecting really good, consistent measurements. That was what was time consuming. So I was really surprised how quickly things moved once we were sort of well equipped and we're actually out in the field.
Yeah, and I'll agree with that. I think, Anna, you almost surpassed our expectations just because you not only did a first sweep of the campus in full, that was our ultimate goal, you actually went back twice and rechecked areas that you had uncertainties with, which was hugely impressive. Can you talk a moment about your tools, your equipment, quantities of each that you used for this effort?
Sure. I had 5 total students, but they all weren't working at the same time. So as students, you know, some semesters they're able to work and some semesters they're not. So based on the, you know, quantity of students you have, obviously this would fluctuate. Lots of tape measures. We had many of those. I made, well, I asked them just to carry them around as they go to campus because they were able to just double check things that maybe would come up. And then also digital levels to measure slope. So we had 2 of those that we sort of circulated. As I said, they would go out with a specific sort of dispatch and directive to be collecting one thing. So not everybody would be looking at slopes at one time. So we were able to share that. Each student did have an iPad. That was their, you know, method of data collection. And then we also had measure wheels, which were really important for measuring parking spaces because it's just really time-consuming to try to do that with a typical tape. So the measure wheels were very helpful, and then also a door pressure gauge. So one of the measurements that we took on each exterior door across campus was how much force it takes to open that door to a 90-degree angle. And so there's these really simple little tools that it's about the size of a pin that you use to push the door open, and then it'll tell you how many pounds of force it took to open that door. And so that's, I think, basically the rundown of the actual equipment.
Okay. Now, Jessica and Pamela, do you guys have any other questions about, the actual survey effort before we go more into the GIS system development?
This is Pam. When you were measuring slopes, how did you go about determining where you were actually going to put the level on the ground and take a measurement for the slope? Is it just sidewalk or walkways that you noticed had any sort of incline in them, what was the distance that you measured to get the slope? If that makes sense.
Yeah,
I guess sorry, I was just going to follow up with that because we were looking at possibly like using, our digital elevation model to apply slope from that to like known sidewalks and routes around campus. But you're talking about like very sort of pinpoint specific slopes that you guys measured?
Yes, we actually, so I'd be interested to try this a number of different ways, and I know that we talked about doing it a number of different ways, but because we were looking at particularly collecting point data, I think this could probably be enhanced, so I'd be interested to see what you guys find out if you try this. But it is, once you get used to looking at these things, it is fairly obvious where there is a slope, unless it's just extremely gradual for a very, very, very long stretch. So yes, they actually went around and selected points and measured the slope at that point, and then also measured the length that the slope continues. And so we actually took the highest level of slope at that point, and so we went back and forth on this often, but this is finally what we landed on to give us a clear picture, because sometimes there are very, very small segments of a sidewalk that are a very steep slope. And so for us to really capture, and some of these things are maybe under a building overhang or not quite visible otherwise, and depending on your DEM, that might be something that is totally accurate for you. But if it is a very short distance, it still makes an area inaccessible, and it might be missed. So we actually went out and checked and checked and checked and checked and created point data. So it was the best way for us to do it. It's the best solution that we had at the time, but I am curious to explore other options.
Anna, we have a couple questions in the queue. I'll go ahead and ping those out to you. One is, when collecting data, were there any weather considerations, such as how snow or wind might affect accessibility?
Well, there were snow or wind considerations as to when my surveyors wanted to go out, and Michelle would probably attest for this, that we were out in the snow and in the rain, and but like I said, well, so there's the other, I'm not sure which angle this is taking. It could be taking the angle of are you addressing issues that come up when they're, with snow removal and accessibility and things like that, the answer to that would be that we definitely noticed them, but we didn't necessarily document those. But as far as collecting data, like I said, the actual data collection goes pretty quickly, and we were able to do what we could in some adverse situations, but it wasn't the actual weather for the folks in the field wasn't problematic in our personal experience. Now, if you're in a place where the snow stays on the ground, that's going to be problematic, because when there was snow, we just happened to not have a lot of snow that during that period. But if there is snow on the ground, that will be problematic. So you want to sort of plan the best you can, around that.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the GIS development, if y'all are okay with that.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Sounds good.
Great. Let me minimize my tools. Okay, so on the screen right now is the old UK accessibility map that I need to contact Jerry and have him take down. So far, we have released what we see as phase 1 of the accessibility routing technology solution here. This is a moving target. As soon as we get the information on a map, it's already in the process of getting outdated. So since the data is now being managed by facilities, we are establishing and further growing the relationships within our facilities management walls to ensure that when new construction projects are hitting the ground, that accessibility information will be communicated to us. Or if someone goes out and they change a manual door swing to automatic, that we can be notified to update the map. So this is a very fast-moving target. So it's one thing that the data was collected, but really, in my mind, this is where the hard part starts. So right now, what we wanted to do is get a first phase product out there. And what that product looks like is we've integrated into our official UK campus visitor map, which is on the screen right now. And so we have this one data set. We call these our 2.5D buildings, or perspective buildings, which give a really nice perspective of the height and the size of campus buildings. But for accessibility, that's not really the primary focus. It really is just getting me to and from certain buildings. So if you were to map from one building to another building using just the current routing functionality, you will see that on the left side here in the directions, it gives you your, your pedometer steps and the travel time and a drop down for the estimated types of walking pace. But you can click this button to show the accessible path. And this automatically turns on the accessible features. We can also toggle it here through our accessibility. So what this is showing is an inaccessible route can just navigate the sidewalks, whereas the accessible path really has to go around a different area to accommodate for. So that is how we have currently integrated into the official campus map. These are somewhat, you can see them as hard-coded routes. They are not dynamic. Our programmers are working on a phase 2 application that will integrate all of the umpteen, I don't even know how many yet, attributes that have been captured. So our vision is that we'll probably come up with like 3 or 4 different profiles where it'll be a standalone accessible map, and maybe in the table of contents you can say if you're on crutches, or if you're in a wheelchair, or if you're in a a motorized wheelchair. We have to come up with the verbiage for this, but you would select that profile, and then it would have like check boxes and click all these umpteen different attributes by default to create that route. And then you could turn them off or add on more based on your own personal needs. That's kind of our thought. But for now, what we've developed is just this integrated, very, I don't want to call it dumb because we're really proud of it, but it's very simplified. If you are looking for an accessible route, you basically can only navigate using these pink routes. One of the glaring things that you can see with this map is that there's a lot of buildings that do not have a pink route going to them. They have accessible doors, but they don't have a route that's accessible. So, this is glaring of where we need to improve our campus. So we understand that there's transparency needs that have to happen when you're communicating this type of information, and it's a sensitive subject. But we're responsible for showing the data, and that's what we're doing. So I'm going to now turn to a couple different slides that I've put together, Brian actually put together. So this is the campus interactive map, what it currently shows. Accessible entrances, and there's automatic and manual. They're both accessible, but the difference between an automatic and manual is that force that Anna was talking about, where if you can manually open the door but it doesn't have a huge amount of force, then it can be deemed as accessible. So we are showing these on the map. And Anna, feel free to chime in at any time.
Yeah, it's sort of curious. There's no actual recommendation on exterior doors as far as force. So that was something that, though we have it recorded and it's something that maybe we could address and mitigate with the university, it's not something that's actually included in those. But those doors are, for example, they're wide enough. They have hardware that's accessible. They have an approach that's accessible. And once you enter the door, you're entering the building, not a set of stairs. So those manual doors would require the user to open the door, on their own. So it's nice to have that difference, though, because obviously the automatic doors are favored greatly.
Right. Okay. And this is showing parking spots. The pink are cars and the black are van accessible. It's a lot of data. And this is kind of one of the things we're negotiating around for phase 2 is how do you show all this huge amounts of information. So, we're working on it. I'll just go over here and show you that table of contents of what is shown as an accessibility feature. Hazard. You want to specify what a hazard would look like to you, Anna?
A hazard is, it's not necessarily presenting a danger, but I would definitely consider that those all barriers. So this is, technically a walk path becomes inaccessible if there is like a pavement transition that's greater in height than 1/4 of an inch. So some pavement transitions have been recorded as hazards that are 1.5 inches, and some are 1/2 inch. That differentiate that difference is that measurement is sort of right now it's sort of buried in the data, but that is an example of one of the hazards. There's a number of things that are just in the way in a sidewalk, such as I think like a light pole or a fixed trash can, things like that. And then there's also some consideration, which you guys have another solution for this too, but anytime construction just interrupts a pathway or shuts it down. Sometimes there's sewer covers that are sunken within a pathway, so there's a number of things that, depending on your mode of mobility, could be very problematic for you or not so problematic. So finding a way to sort of to mitigate to parse through those as a user is obviously a challenge. But we do have that information available, and not only could it be helpful for folks to navigate, but we hope it could also be helpful to sort of direct services and to look at what can be fixed and what are some quick fixes that we can work on throughout campus.
Right, and just to go through the rest of these really quickly, you have curb cuts, audible signals, bus facility, drop-off, emergency phone, pavement transition, slope remark. That's just actual a verbal indicator, or I guess a written indicator of what the slope is. Correct, Anna?
Yes.
Yeah, because you can put slope in the line feature. We did it in a point. Steps, and then why don't you talk about what other is in the data set?
I don't remember exactly. I would have to look back, but I guarantee other will pop up. And well, I guess an example of other would be if there's a tree branch that's really, really low. There's things like that come up that you just don't think about that we needed a category for. So that would be an example.
Cool. Okay, these are a couple of examples of routes. So here's displaying a normal route from Funkhauser to Anderson, and that was the example I just showed, versus the accessible. Actually, I think I have those switched. Looks like it to me. Sorry about that. So the next one is Taylor, from Peterson Service Building to Taylor. This is really a shocking one because in this you can see that from the Peterson Service Building, you can exit the front door and take the sidewalk and cross the street and enter the front of Taylor. But the accessible route has you going from Peterson over the pedway, into the parking structure, down the elevator, down the sidewalk, crosswalk, and then to the back door of Taylor Ed. Much different picture.
I think that's a great illustration.
Yeah, it really is.
That's a great illustration as to why this is so key, because just imagine how hard it would be to figure that out on your own. So thank you for that slide. That's great.
Yep. A little bit more minor and hard to see, but it does matter. Here's one from Mining Mineral to Singletary. You'll notice that the route is on the north side of Rose Street, but there are some slopes there, so the accessible route has to take the south side of Rose and then cross and enter the Singletary Center much further north.
Hey, Michelle, I got a question with the last route that you just showed. So you sort of went a little multimodal there in the sense that an individual had to go across the Petty Bridge and down an elevator. So is that like a part of the network? Do you have a multimodal network, or you said that these are hard-coded routes, so you guys just knew from the information you gathered that to be considered a totally accessible route from that building to the other building, you had to go that way, so you just drew it that way?
Yeah, we're mapping the center lines through buildings where the need arises right now with this. You know, we do have other projects with interior space, and we're part of the growing effort to figure out how to map, you know, 3D content in a 2D environment, floor plans. So we're really just kind of making it work right now and putting in the interior routes where they're needed. I wouldn't call it multimodal because we're only really doing sidewalks or, you know, these interior routes. I mean, I guess it is multi, but we're not seeing it that way. We're not going into bicycles or vehicular routes right now. Just walking paths, I guess I could say. Mm-hmm. Good question. Okay. And really the last one here is going from plant sciences to Pavilion A. So this starts from the south side of campus and goes over a pedway. And what you can see here is it goes under this awning. Especially if you can walk under this Ag North. But if you were needing an accessible route, you would actually go through Ag North. A little different through the building to get out. And that's really it with that. Now I'll go into some of these prepared questions that Jessica and Pam had sent us. So the first one is like, you know, what is the overall process and workflow for creating the transportation network? So basically it starts with just a data cleanup. So, you know, once all the data was delivered from Anna, I mean, the students did a great job, but still this is really dirty data. So it takes a lot of cleaning. You planarize the center line just to make sure that you have splits at every junction. And then you have to ensure that the entrances and all accessibility features are snapped to center lines. As far as the database design goes, listed are the participating layers. I'm going to go and zoom in a little bit more, might as well. We have sidewalk center lines. Those are the only lines. The rest are points. Building and parking entrances, and the multiple accessibility features that we showed. Accessible parking spaces are shown as points, but they're standalone. They're not really listed in using the network right now. And then also that main accessible route, which is those lines that we use to show all thoroughfares on campus that are accessible. As far as the required fields, let me change this. Oops, sorry about that. You asked about the required fields. There's the Z elevation field, which is to and from, and that was used for modeling paths that go like under and over tunnels or pedways. Put a little illustration here as an example. We don't use like what you would think of as elevation value, like 983 feet. We just use this best practice of assigning like ones and zeros. So the line going over this pedway in the graphic on the right is 1, and the sidewalk underneath it is a 0, and that's how you force those elevations, if that makes sense. And so these are what are participating in that. Time window is another required field, but we don't use it right now. You can use that for, I guess, preferred pathways for certain times of day. Okay, so next with create the network set, you basically just create it. You select the participating features and you create the network. We used the sidewalk center lines as our edges and everything else as a junction. And then so you have to set the connectivity rules. So there's 3 options: endpoint, override, and honor. You really only want to do an override in our network when you're talking about the accessibility features that fall along a center line. So it's not just like, if you're routing from a building entrance along a route line to a parking entrance. That's kind of like a junction, edge junction. It's a very clean route. But when you have the accessibility features that intersect the line at vertices within the line, you want to do an override to establish that. Next is to establish the model elevation, and that again is using those elevation fields. And then you create your network attributes, the 2 that we're currently using in our network. I guess with hierarchies, that's really going to be used with like a multimodal network. But with the costs and restrictions, costs measure impedances like travel time, whereas a restriction is something that indicates something that restricts the network. So you can see here, with restrictions we have, there's no curb cut, there's a slope, and so forth, whereas the cost is the length of the and the travel time. And then you just build the network. It might take a couple of builds, you fix any errors, and you test it to make sure that the results look as you expected. Next, you publish the map service. Now, we put that here that this is like recommended, but we're not doing this right now. We're not publishing, an actual network service. Our front-end programming, like the website I showed you, is using certain calls that were designed with our initial sidewalk routing. To save time, we just didn't go in the live way to do routing on the fly and to be able to route around construction areas. And we have that currently under development. And then all of a sudden, the accessibility project came, and so we just kind of put the data under that same umbrella of programming and said, okay, well, in the second pass, when we want to do the dynamic routing for sidewalks, we'll be able to do dynamic routing of accessibility features too. So this was kind of like leveraging our existing code. So if you were going to do this from your end, we would recommend you publish a map service and just go and build your application straight out of the gate using the network. What we did though is we did this route generation. So the routes are generated on the desktop side, and then loaded the features into a line feature class that is published as a map service. We have just the basic accessible routes that I mentioned. And so if you go to the UK Interactive Campus Map, you're only going to see accessible routes that have this criteria. They're avoiding closed routes like construction areas. They avoid areas with no curb cuts. They avoid excessive slopes, and they avoid steps. And then it displays the fastest possible route for each building combination, and then also for the parking. So you asked, how do you assign a cost value for time it takes to get from point A to B? And did you include road crossings? Not right now. We do have that planned for future implementations, and there's 2 possible strategies, either using it via a line or a point. And in both cases, you just assign a cost attribute to generate that information. And then again, you asked about travel modes. We're currently just routing sidewalks, but we do plan to include the bicycles and vehicle traffic routing as well. You asked about assigning elevation, and again, we used that elevation field criteria as I mentioned. And then with slopes, we did capture that as well, not through the DEM like you had asked about, but through the method that Anna mentioned using the equipment. You also asked if we assigned values to preferred routes. right now we only have one preferred route, and that is the cat's path. The cat's path on our campus are literally decals that are on the sidewalk, that if you follow those big cat paw prints, then that'll be the safest walking route on campus. So we do have that incorporated into our network, and you can see in this example that the section of the route changes just where it forces it to go down the cat's path. You asked if we're using buildings as a point junction, and we said yes, but we're also using parking entrances as well. You asked about setting up the pedometer function. Just to kind of, recap everyone what that question is about, it's the steps. And this was just something that our IT guys put in. They literally just, found what some calculations were on the internet for travel time from point A to point B in steps, and this is doing the math on the fly. We had like a Fitbit challenge on UK's campus, so it was a pretty big deal to count your steps, so that's where that came from, just fun. And then the last question, I think it's the last question, talks about how did we go from setting up the network in ArcGIS to implementing the website. And again, the programming for the dynamic routing is still in progress. We do have to change the code significantly. So what we did is we created an accessibility route line feature, and the process was basically to set up an MXD with the network dataset layers, and then we added a closest facility routing layer, loaded in all possible building entrances in both the incident and facility locations, and then ran a solver to return all possible combinations. And we repeated that for parking entrances as well. This was a very large data set, about 700,000 rows of data. But the feature class at that point was then published as a map service, and then it's just queried by the user via the interactive map. Now, this current workflow, I mean, it works. It's painful if there's a change, which we don't have too many changes right now. So on my side, what we do is we push out major releases in the summer to prepare for the fall students. So it's not too painful for us, but we will have this updated to the dynamic routing functionality for the next release in the fall. Okay, Jessica, what questions do you have?
Wow, that was great, you guys. You actually answered so many of our questions ahead of time. I actually think the conversation about slope and elevation, Anna brought up a really good point with that one, in that if you're relying on a DEM, you have to take into consideration what the resolution of your DEM is and whether you're going to capture all of these spots that, like she mentioned, under overhangs or just areas of the sidewalk that obviously your DEM might not capture. So that was actually really an interesting point to me that I don't think we thought about.
Much more.
Go ahead.
No, just much more. It's much more detailed when you're talking about some of the slope measurements that Anna and her crew took into consideration. I don't know if a DEM would capture such the small areas.
Right. Yeah. The more, originally I was thinking it would be easier if we could, just pinpoint spots along our walking routes, capture the elevation, and then calculate the slopes, but that wouldn't be very precise, or precise enough in some areas to get an actual slope for accessibility purposes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I'm going to send a shout out to the attendees. We do have a couple questions in the queue. Go ahead and submit any other questions right now that you'd like answered, and we'll see if we can hammer those out before the end of the hour. Jessica, do you have any other questions before we go to Q&A?
I don't think so. I think we'll let some of the other folks ask some questions while they have a chance to, and if you don't have any questions in the queue, I'm sure we could continue the conversation.
Okay. We just have a couple. One of them is the data shown on these maps used to make capital planning decisions, such as sidewalk improvements? That is a great question, and I think that the answer is we hope it will be. Those who registered for the session, there was a link to a little video that was made by the University of Kentucky. It was very, very nicely done, and I think you guys got a good crew that put that together. But you know, our challenge in the university is people knowing about the resources. That's always the challenge. And so, you know, we're getting the opportunity to more and more, you know, put these resources in front of people, and we're hoping that they're going to use them. And what I find is that people are starting to drink the Kool-Aid. After our effort at FIS for 10 years, it's starting to stick, like just now, just this year. And people are coming in, they're saying, hey, can you show the construction information on the map? Can we get this into your GIS? Can you be at the table during this decision-making process? Can you be here during the RFP? We are getting those levels of involvement now. So I think the answer is it's on deck. Another question is, let's see, do you still have sustained funding? Well, this is just being consumed by my department. We don't have any funding for it at all. So it's nope, what we do. It looks like some of the accessible routes can be quite lengthy. Are there any accommodations like a point-to-point shuttle or a golf cart for those who cannot walk a mile? There's a shuttle on campus, isn't there, Anna?
Yeah, there are. There's a whole other set of interesting, you know, things when you start to look at those. Thankfully, parking and transportation is, you know, a separate department at UK, and they have been at the table with us. And within their planning, I know that this information's really been helpful to them. And they currently they have just, I'm not sure if they're running yet, but they just got a couple new vehicles that are actually doing sort of a Uber-style service on campus, and I'm talking about accessible vehicles for students and, you know, staff and faculty with accessibility needs. And we do have buses that run through some of the major roads of campus. And just depending on the time of day, those can be helpful. But I think this new shuttle service that's sort of on demand will be maybe more helpful, but it's just a problem. A lot of times that you do have to spend a lot more time to find a path that works for you, and we're hopeful that at least by having this data available, folks will be able to plan accordingly, such as you know, making their class schedule, and they'll have the information to make sure they're able to get where they need to go on time. So we do have a couple services supplementing, and they're continuing to sort of try to improve those.
Yep. Okay, how often do you go back to check for hazards that have occurred since the initial locating? Also, how do you maintain construction zones? Construction zone mapping is done through my department. Not everything is communicated. That's always a challenge. But for the most part, we do have a I'll go ahead and open it up. It's called construction.uky.edu. And so this is the construction map. Everything's moving a little bit slow. So people report construction projects to us. We post them on the map. Sometimes I notice that it's a little bit slow when we're here. So we list all the projects here, and we show them on the map. And we keep planned construction projects and also existing construction projects. So if we know about it, it's on the map. And that's what's really good, because we use that as our inventory method to locate all of any changes that are within those boundaries. So that's great. We just don't get all of them. So like I said, we are meeting with some of the construction area groups to ensure that the information is getting updated. There was also some discussion on there being a certificate at UK, Anna, where some of those people might be able to be some stewards of the data. Do you know if anything more became of that discussion?
Yeah, we have a Universal Design undergraduate certificate that is starting up in the fall, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And so
yeah, congratulations.
We'll see how it's been an effort, but we're really excited about it. Very interdisciplinary work, but there's definitely going to be folks that, as their practicum, will probably participate in some of this work.
Mm-hmm. I got a couple questions here about some of our documentation. Anna, do you have your yours on like how you measure things and any photos of that process?
I don't have them pulled up, I guess, right now. And feel free to connect me with these folks too.
Yeah.
But just as, say a little more specifically what that might mean. I'm sorry.
Just pictures of the measurements. Like you talked about, like there were 9 different measurements of a parking spot. Like, do you have any documentation that shows what those are that were taken in our data?
Some of them I do, particularly with parking, because there's always a lot of gray area on which side of the stripe do you measure at and things like that. So we definitely developed some of that. There's also some instructional videos that I use that actually show how to capture those. But that was a pretty constant seeking out resources and also creating them as we went along. So we do have that documentation. I mean, I do have step-by-step, click-by-click workflows. Some of those include photos, some of them don't.
What I'll do is I'll get the information from you. I think you gave us most of it, and then I'll send it out to all the attendees today. Oh, God, the questions are pouring in. Okay. Let's see. So, got that one. How often do you go back? No. Is anyone linking to their class scheduling system? Not that I'm aware of, Jade, but again, hopefully they will eventually. I think that once we have the fall system released, that's really going to be a huge, it's going to be a big black eye for the university too, because it's going to show where we're not compliant. So, but these are good things. I think one of the powers of GIS is not showing where things are, but it's showing where the data needs to be improved. And these are real life problems that need to be improved. Any concerns about liability? Any disclaimers you publish or rely on? Not at this time, though that probably is not a bad idea. Have you seen anything or researched anything regarding seasonal routing? In other words, during the winter, only certain walkways or sidewalks are cleared during a snow event, and the routing is limited during that season or time frame. You know, right now we don't have that issue. We don't get much snow, and if we do, UK closes. So I don't know if that's a wimpy way out, but that's kind of what it is. Do you have anything to offer with that, Anna?
I actually did a class project with one of the geography classes, and we went out while it happened to be snowing. We didn't plan it, and look, they were able to document and make a map of about 300, 400 points with photos of concerns that were in the snow. So that was sort of an interesting way to get a snapshot of the kinds of things that pop up. That's not something, that is a real barrier for us, and we're sort of lucky for that. You know, a lot of people, it is a problem, and so if you have a lot of snow, that will take, you know, that'll be a different sort of beast to tackle there, because it is problematic, particularly with snow removal and accessible parking spaces. I'd say 9 out of 10 access aisles that are at the end of a row are just piled up with snow, so that's just getting out of, folks getting out of vehicles is always problematic too, so that's just something to think about. But yeah, we're a little bit lucky here that it hasn't been a real barrier for us, so we haven't had to really spend time considering that.
Okay, just the last couple of questions. I'll try to hammer out how many square miles did you all cover in 9 months? Not sure. We're about a 900-acre campus. Do you have that number at all? I
don't. I think at some point I broke out the phases to try to make sure they were about don't have that handy.
Yeah. Sorry. Last question. We have found that some accessible entries are locked in the evening. Any thoughts on dealing with this issue?
Yeah. So
what do you think, Anna?
This was something that was a barrier for us. And so in planning, it's just something to think about. And who you're getting on board. So because this money came, through sort of the core of the university, it was a true university project, and so we were able to approach folks like parking and building operations and say, this is what's happening, this is what the university wants us to do, and this is what we're doing, and how can you help us? And we were lucky to have really everybody on board, even though I'm sure that there was concerns of things being exposed, but everybody sort of just took that as what it is, and we're providing information, and they were helpful. So I had a number that I would call and ask them to dispatch someone to unlock certain doors, so that while that was cumbersome, and there were lots of doors tagged as locked for many reasons. The doors that are used by faculty, staff, students, and not the service employees were mostly all, we were able to get them all unlocked. We did not survey in the evening for a number of reasons, but that would be one of them. And something else to consider, it was really fast and easy for us to survey campus when maybe there was a holiday or a break. So if there were students that were wanting to work during that time, looking at parking spots and measuring them without cars in it was wonderful. Measuring routes and walk paths without people walking on top of you was really helpful. And on the flip side of that, all the doors were locked. So planning that was pretty strategic. I think that that did help us move things quickly. But yeah, it's a problem, and it's just something that hopefully your building operations folks will be helpful with.
Okay, well, we're going to go ahead and end our webinar. A couple questions more still in the queue, but I want to be respectful of people's time. So Jessica, Pam, Anna, thank you so much for the meeting today. I think it was fun. I think it was good. I hopefully people learned a lot. I got some really good feedback from some people who appreciated the presentation. So thank you. Any last words, Jessica?
No, I am really curious if there are other universities out there that have done exactly what you guys have done or even gone further. We really are trying to build a campus network and would love more universities to talk about their experiences with it.
Awesome. Well, anybody out there, reach out to Jessica if you would like to talk more on the subject, or reach out to us as well. So with that, everyone, have a wonderful day, and thank you for joining. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you.